is we could not have put a program in place as fast as we have been able to and as efficiently as we've been able to if we didn't have a good partnership with our technology partners.
From Tyler Technologies, it's the Tyler Tech Podcast, where we talk about issues facing communities today and highlight the people, places, and technology making a difference. My name is Jeff Harrell. I'm the Director of Content Marketing for Tyler Technologies, and I'm glad that you join me. Well, today we are looking at this challenge. What happens when medical cannabis is approved and a state must quickly move to implement regulations? Well, that's exactly where Kris Adcock, who is the director of the Mississippi Medical Cannabis Program, found herself. Kris is with the Mississippi State Department of Health and is an accomplished administrator and proven leader within multiple Mississippi state government systems. She leveraged her 20 plus years of experience to help figure this problem out. Today, Alex Valvassori, who is Tyler's general manager for Cannabis Licensing, speaks with Kris to find out exactly how she did it. Without further ado, here is Alex's conversation with Kris Adcock.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Valvassori, General Manager for Tyler Technologies' Cannabis Licensing team. I'm joined today with Kris Adcock, Director for Mississippi's Medical Cannabis Program. Kris, thanks for being on today.
Absolutely, Alex. Glad to be with you.
So I am really excited to jump in to talk about Mississippi's medical cannabis program. There's kind of an interesting history here. I know this is something that people in Mississippi have been talking about for a while now. So yeah, I'd love to hear about how the program came about.
Oh my goodness, Alex. So like a lot of other things here in Mississippi, it was really started as a grassroots effort. People in our state had loved ones that were affected by different illness, different conditions, and they really started to look for alternative treatment for their loved ones. And so about 3 to 4 years ago, people really started to come together around the issue. So it really kicked off as a grassroots effort, like I said, and really turned into a movement that is turning into an industry in our state. Like other states, we initially had a constitutional amendment, and 74% of our population voted for a medical cannabis program in the state. Throughout that process, it was challenged in the court system, and ultimately our Supreme Court turned over the initiative process that brought medical cannabis to our state. So there were a lot of people who were very disheartened really at that point. But the issue actually was taken up by our legislature this past legislative session, and members of our legislature started to craft a program from what was originally Initiative 65. And many drafts later, it became the Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act that we have today.
Wow, interesting. So it certainly has been a long and winding road for sure. And so yes. When did you plug into the program? How did that all come about?
So originally that came about, we knew at the health department that we would be involved in the program in some way, since it was going to be a medical program rather than a recreational program. So our state health officer at the time was Dr. Thomas Dobbs, and he really started to have conversations with different members of different groups, really. He started to work with our medical association. He started to work with our state board of health to really educate people on what was going on with this big policy shift that was happening in our state. So I came to this agency after working about 20 years in healthcare administration and actually child welfare. And I've always done work around system development and building regulatory infrastructures. And so I thought that I could lend some of that experience to this new program and this new industry in our state.
That's great to hear that you had that experience, Kris. I think so often these programs kind of come out of nowhere and then everyone starts to scramble. And so I know the program is lucky to have you guiding on those fronts. And so, of course, this all came about very quickly, right? I think the legislature passed the law at the beginning of this year, and then there was a very short timeline to get things going. So walk us through what those first few weeks and months were like.
Yes. So the legislature originally passed the act. It was signed by our governor actually on February the 2nd. And we had some very, very ambitious timelines that we were working under. At the time, we had 120 days to get the program completely developed and up and running. So we definitely had to approach this in different phases and different stages. The program that we have today will grow and change, and it will not be the program that we have next year, probably. So we had started some policy development and some rule development under the constitutional initiative effort, actually, because like I said, we knew we would have a role in the process. And we just took that work and fast forwarded it and moved into the legislative work. And so the minute that the bill was signed, we were reaching out to you guys to help us with IT infrastructure and just fast track our rulemaking process.
So it sounds like it was a little bit of a scramble then for those first couple of weeks, a lot to pull together in a very short period of time.
I kind of say we were moving like the Tasmanian devil at that point, just trying to get things done very quickly. We actually were fortunate in that our legislature really was in tune to the fact that there were going to be some bureaucratic barriers that we needed to overcome. So we did get some special exemption for some contracting that we knew we would have to do. We got to expedite some rulemaking because we still were very keyed into the fact that we had to be transparent in our actions. So all of the normal timelines that exist in our state for rulemaking and for contracting were just compressed into that process.
As you guys have worked through all of this, a lot has happened since that time back in February. I'm certainly excited to celebrate the fact that you guys launched the program over the summer. You now have licenses that have been issued, applications that have been submitted, all of that. So what went on over the summer now and kind of where are we now as we look towards the end of August?
Right. So we experienced growing pains early on because we were putting in place a program and bringing to the state an industry that would be a regulated industry in our state. And people were not necessarily familiar with what that would look like. So there were points of anxiety, I would say. There were probably even some points that we looked at each other and thought this can never happen in 120 days. And we're just stubborn enough that we were going to make it happen. So one of the key things that we did early on is we started to talk to other states because we were the 30 plus state to put a medical program in place. So we really started to talk to other states and started to see who the key players were in this industry and how we could engage with them very quickly. That's one of the ways that we found you guys even. We looked to what other states had in place and what was working well and wanted to build on that. One of the best pieces of advice that I got early on was spend most of your time at this point on your business process and building your IT systems. Because we knew that the program would be very heavily driven by data also. So in order to make that work, we had to have the systems to accommodate that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I assume, Kris, along the way, you guys encountered CANRA. And I mentioned CANRA because they were recent guests. We had Jillian and Andrew on, members of the CANRA team. And so are you guys members of CANRA? And what's that been like?
We are, and that has been one of the best things that we did. We found out about CANRA early on and joined. We reached out to Jillian. Andrew was actually here in the state over the summer providing some testimony with our legislature. So it has been an invaluable resource for us. If anyone is new to this industry and new to this space, that would be one of the first things that I tell people to do is join CANRA, because you automatically are plugged into a network of state regulators who have walked this walk, and they are very willing to share resources with you and very willing to say, this is what worked, but better yet, this is what didn't work sometimes. And so there's some invaluable lessons there.
So, speaking of which, Kris, what have been some of those major challenges as you look back on the last 6 months? What would you say are the top one or two challenges you guys had to overcome?
The first challenge was really the time, Alex. Most states have a longer period to look and to study. And we just didn't have that luxury. And we had been doing that studying and doing that research, but we found out very, very quickly that you can't necessarily have enough human capital, enough people to make these processes efficient. So we had to rely on our technology to make processes efficient. We have a system that does not rely on paper whatsoever. And that's a little bit different here in Mississippi. People are used to papers and forms and where do they deliver it? So that education and overcoming that initial, I guess, kind of culture shock has really been a growing pain for us.
Well, that lends itself to another question, and that is what surprised you about all of this. Certainly, I'm surprised to hear that there has historically been such a reliance on paper.
Oh gosh,
But
yes.
are there other things that, as you've gone through all of this, things that maybe caught you by surprise, things that you didn't expect that you'd encounter working through all of this?
Really coming from a background of state government and from healthcare, this industry is completely fascinating to me. There is so much more technology and science that is associated with it than I ever imagined. And to me, it's been very refreshing to see the passion that drives the people in this industry. And to me, that's very motivating. On those days when we think, we're not sure how this is going to play out or how this is going to end, it's going back and looking at that and looking at the attitudes that people have and taking that as motivation. That has been very surprising to me.
That makes me curious, Kris.
Uh-huh.
How have perceptions changed in the last few months? I think most people think as Mississippi is a generally conservative state.
Yes.
I certainly never thought, way back in 2015 when I got into this industry, that Mississippi would be legalizing medical cannabis. And
Right.
so I'm sure at the beginning, right, there was probably all kinds of opinions. And now that program has launched, I'm curious to know, have you seen any changes in how the public perceives cannabis as medicine and more broadly just of the program in general?
Initially, Alex, I'd share your thought. I never thought that we would be talking about the use of medical cannabis in Mississippi. We are a conservative state, so I've been surprised about that. And we do have some people who are taking what I would call a wait and see approach. There are naysayers, but the overwhelming response, I would say, has been positive. People are cautiously optimistic about the program. And I think that we'll see that continue to change. We're seeing that really education is key. We have a good partnership with the industry associations. We have an excellent partnership with the Patients Alliance in our state. And so I think we're going to continue to see public perception evolve in Mississippi.
That's great to hear. Now, changing gears a little bit, you've mentioned technology a couple times throughout our conversation. And so
Right.
I'd love to hear about what's been working well. And then I'd also love to see where maybe you're seeing opportunities.
I think there's a lot of opportunity around this industry, period. But we're seeing that our technology is really working well. If we could not have put a program in place as fast as we have been able to, and as efficiently as we've been able to, if we didn't have a good partnership with our technology partners. And I mean everything from our people who are building our system to our analysts that are working through this. I've been involved in other major system implementations, and those implementations, we've always tried to make a system fit a business process. And for us, because this was brand new, we took a lot of the system and made the system components and workflows our business process. So that has been a huge opportunity for us. And for me personally, it's been very nice to have a working relationship with a technology company that is pretty relaxed, and we can call up our development team and say, hey, this is a problem, help us think through how to fix it. And we get answers. And if we don't get them immediately, we get them shortly thereafter. And that's not always the case, and that's not always the level of customer service that you receive.
That is great to hear, Kris. Well, we really appreciate the endorsement, and we see a lot of opportunity ahead, right? It's amazing how we've seen our clients grow over time. So we're excited to be a part of that journey. A topic we hear a lot about in the industry is social equity.
Right.
And so I'd love to know kind of how your team is thinking about social equity and what that looks like in Mississippi.
Mhm. So we have a great team that really has various backgrounds. I've got people on my team who have traditionally worked in healthcare, they've worked in communications, they've worked in agriculture. And so everyone comes to the table with a different idea and a different philosophy sometimes. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on access to medical cannabis for patients, but making sure that that access is safe. And safety is one of our first and foremost concerns. So really for us, equity equates to access, both from an individual standpoint and from a business standpoint. One of the very smart things that was done early on is that smaller businesses in Mississippi have an opportunity to get into the industry, just like some of our larger multi-state operators. So we have a tiered licensure system, and we even have some requirements that Mississippians have an advantage for a time period so that they could get into the industry in Mississippi. From a patient standpoint, we have some reduced card fees for people who are on fixed income or maybe Medicaid beneficiaries or are disabled veterans. So the program doesn't just fund itself. The revenue generated from the program actually is returned to the state legislature, so it can be appropriated through the legislative process rather than being earmarked for certain projects. So I think that early on, everyone was very focused on equity across the board, both from a business standpoint and from a patient standpoint. And that translates into our everyday work.
Well, it sounds like you guys have put a lot into that early on, which is great to hear. I think sometimes states don't have that benefit, right? It's something that they stumble into later, and then it's a lot of work to kind of come back to that. So it's great to hear that you guys have started on the right foot. As you guys look to the future, what's next for Mississippi's medical cannabis program? And if you could talk to the governor or the legislature today, are there any fixes or things that you would ask for to help improve the program?
I have conversations almost weekly with members of our legislature, and I always talk about our legislative wish list that we're already working on. And it's funny that they're working on their own wish list as well. So we'll actually have some meetings later in the fall to compare notes, if you will, and look at what needs to be the legislative agenda really going forward, because we know that over the next years, we're going to be improving legislation. We're going to be improving regulations. And it's simply that we're learning more as we go. And the industry as a whole is really pretty immature. And as the industry develops, then we will develop with it. So that's, to me, really exciting from a public policy standpoint.
Is there one or two things at the top of your list, Kris, that you'd love to see come out of the next session?
I would love to see some work around further defining some of our licensure tiers and our activities. I would love to see some work around how we would reinvest that income that the program does generate and have some recommendations for that, because I think there are opportunities, if we're going to have a medical program, to look at potentially how we could reinvest in public health and even substance abuse prevention or things like law enforcement training. We're going to see those needs arise as the program evolves.
Well, I'm really excited to see where it all goes. I know in the meantime, you guys are very busy managing applications and licensees. The program is taking off like crazy.
Right.
So let's take a moment to speak to all those licensees that might be tuned in here today. What advice do you have for them as they navigate all of this? And what can they do to make your life easier as a regulator?
Oh, gosh. First, when you look at our Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act, it's an intimidating 400 plus pages, and no one wants to read that. But my first advice would be, read the law. Make sure that you have educated yourself. Number two, make sure that you're educating yourself by reading the regulations. This is not something that you can come into and apply and expect to be successful if you have not educated yourself on the front end. So that would be my advice for people who are seeking to get into the industry. They may be thinking about applying, but they also don't need to discount what their significant financial investment may be. This is not an industry that is simple. It is complex. It is regulated. There are going to be costs that you don't anticipate, and you have to be prepared for those.
So, Kris, we're nearing the end of our conversation here, but before we wrap up, what advice do you have for regulators who are new to this industry? Obviously, 6 months ago, you guys were really kicking things off here and getting started, or just over 6 months. As new states come along, right, there's still about 10 states to go that haven't yet adopted medical cannabis programs. So if you could talk to them, what would be your words of wisdom to them?
I would say first and foremost, look at what other states have done. Learn from their lessons. Make contact with them. That was something that we did early on, was reach out to other states. And people are more willing to share in this industry than I have seen in other industries. So make sure that you've done that. The second thing that I would do is really look at similar industries that have been regulated for years. Look at those policy areas. For example, look at alcohol and tobacco. Look at the use of manufacturing processes, even in food manufacturing. Look at some of those basics and those core foundational principles that they use, and don't be afraid to reach out. I can't stress that enough.
Kris, thank you so much for being on with us today. We wish you and the program all the best.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Kris, for that. And also for Alex for hosting that podcast episode. We know that cannabis regulations will be something more and more states are dealing with. So we really appreciate that conversation. And I appreciate you for listening to the Tyler Tech Podcast. We drop episodes just about every other week. So please subscribe so you'll be notified when the latest episode drops. We have lots of great episodes planned for the rest of 2022 and on into 2023 as we tackle some of the issues facing communities today. Well, again, my name is Jeff Harrell. This is the Tyler Tech Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.